1986 was an interesting year in terms of both tech and gaming, and not only on C64 having a lot of amazing releases, but in general. IBM, for instance, announced its first laptop weighing at measly 12 pounds, which is around 5.5 kilos. And while it may seem massive today, it was 18 pounds, so more or less 8.5 kilos, lighter than the earlier portable PC. So yeah, back then portable and laptop were very straightforward descriptions. Older one could be transported, and the newer one could be placed on a lap, even if it was cutting all the blood going to your legs out. Microsoft released DOS 3.2, Apple dropped its Mac Plus model with a whopping 1MB of RAM, and Commodore was slowly gearing up for an early next year release of Amiga 500, a computer that would change home gaming forever. That was yet to come though, and what we'll talk about here today and in the next few episodes too are games for C64 released in 1986. So let's get on with it. Ace of Aces is a combat flight simulation set in the World War II. You fly in a Royal Air Force Mosquito long-range fighter bomber equipped with rockets, bombs and cannon. And among the missions you're partaking there will be dogfights with German fighters and bombers, you'll be sent to destroy V-1 flying bombs, you'll attack U-boats and trains, it will be a blast. A bad pun intended. The game features 5 different viewpoints, cockpit, both left and right wings, navigational map and bomb bay. All missions start mid-air, so takeoff and landing are omitted entirely. Which may annoy some of the hardcore simulation fans, but shouldn't be an issue for most. Interesting idea prolonging the playability of Ace of Aces was the ability to combine 2 or more missions into a singular one, making it more difficult but also more fun. Now, those of you who have been following this channel for a little while know that I'm all but a hardcore simulations fan. And I usually judge them based on if I had fun playing and not how much realism was squeezed inside. And I'm happy to say that Ace of Aces was quite fun. Aliens is an arcade computer game with some other genres mixed in varying amounts between different levels. Now, there are 2 games going by the name of Aliens the computer game. This one's American, and there's a separate entirely different game that released in Europe. This came to Europe a few years later where it was marketed as Aliens US version. The plot is shown by comic book-like storyboards, and each of the 6 levels is a bit different gameplay-wise. In first, you need to land your ship safely on the planet. In second, as you're discovered by the aliens, you have to get back to the landing vehicle, fighting your way through labyrinth of corridors. In third level, you're fighting off attacking hordes of aliens via movie called Classic Flamethrower. In fourth, you're looking to find the way through command center to the second landing ship. In fifth, you have 17 minutes before everything explodes to save Newt playing as Ripley. And in the last, you need to kill the alien queen with your exoskeleton by hitting her and eventually throwing out of airlock. Aliens is a very cinematic experience, even if a bit hard, and offers a really impressive graphics for the time, especially in the storyboards. Alleykat is an exclusive for Commodore system for 1 or 2 players, and it's a vertically scrolling shooter. No, that sounds bad. Let's try again. It's a vertically scrolling racer. That's bad too. Oh well, apparently it can be combined into a single word. So it's a vertically scrolling racer/shooter. A unique mixture. You play as a speeder pilot who strives to become the Alleykat champion of 8 space stadiums scattered around the galaxy. Each race has an entry fee, prize money and set of various specifications like a type of race, kind of terrain you'll race on, density of the landscape and number of laps. The races are of one of 7 types: time trial, endurance, demolition, dodgem, survival, slalom or random. Enemies may appear during races and they have to be shot. When you touch an obstacle or are shot, you lose energy. It can be filled up by collecting energy cells spread on tracks. And the game carries on until you can't afford to participate in races anymore. What's worth mentioning is super smooth and fast scrolling. It's a pleasure to behold. Alter Ego came out as 2 separate games, one for each gender, and it's best described as a life simulation, kinda like modern mobile game BitLife. So you create your character, male or female, depending on the game that you play, and mold their personality either by assigning stats randomly or by answering series of introductory questions. When that's done, you guide your character through 7 life phases, from infancy to old age. As you play, many random events and situations will happen that will require a decision to be made. There's usually a few ways you can react to each of the choices. Some of these responses also come with accompanying mood changes. You pick one, game presents you with an outcome and carries on to the next situation. All choices made not only influence your personality, but also have a long-lasting life consequences, on your health for instance. So a wrong choice may end up with a permanent condition or even premature death. The further you go in the game, the more robust and important choices you get, and the better the game becomes. Alter Ego is an odd one, but by God if it's not a good one too. Alternate Reality The City is the first part of a role-playing fantasy series by Datasoft. It was originally supposed to be a very ambitious multi-part series that sadly only ever ended up with 2 games. The game starts with a spaceship hovering over a metropolitan city and beaming people on board. Your character, so our protagonist, included. And while it may suggest a sci-fi theme, the game is actually a fantasy role-playing played from a 3D perspective. All the combat encounters are turn-based, but many of them can be resolved out of combat by either trick, charm or bribery. The story is non-linear, allowing a lot of freedom to either explore or even grind skills, which can be done by taking jobs for instance. Apart from standard at the time stats, skills, experience points and so on, the alternate reality featured quite complex moral system underneath the surface, meaning all your actions are taken note of, evaluated, and depending on the outcome you could be considered either good or evil. And that in turn changes how world reacts to you. Even if alternate reality never saw its full potential realized, only ever released into games, they're both full-featured experiences that are worth trying out just to see what could have been, if for no other reason. Avenger is the sequel to The Way of the Tiger, and that's probably why in some regions it's called The Way of the Tiger 2. It's a top-down fantasy arcade game that, while having a story, is for all intents and purposes just an enhanced clone of the Gauntlet. Yemon, the Grandmaster of the Flame, a villain of the game, killed your foster father Naijish and stole the scrolls of Ketsuin. You start the game outside of Quenchheart Keep and must explore the area and buildings around it to find enough keys to penetrate it and kill each of the 3 guards. Your shots, the shuriken, are limited and when they run out you have to be reliant on your bare hands. Unless you find more shuriken, that is. And that's probably the biggest change from the Gauntlet, that you don't have unlimited projectiles. Well, that and much lower enemy count and time limit, which is not present in the Avenger. If that sounds interesting, give it a go. Bard's Tale 2: The Destiny Knight, while being a follow-up to the earlier game, is considerably expanded in content and much bigger in scope. It's a true sequel. While the gameplay stayed largely the same, second game allows for free exploration of wilderness. It adds 6 big cities and a whole plethora of dungeons that became the staple of the series from then onwards. There are also 2 new buildings in the form of casinos and banks, and a new magic user class of Archmage. The game takes place in the realm that saw 700 years of peace thanks to an artifact called the Destiny Wand, forged by the legendary Archmage Turin. But recently it's been stolen and broken, so you'll have to find all 7 pieces of it, defeat the evil Archmage who's responsible for its disappearance, and then reforge it whole. Interestingly enough, at the game start, apart from creating a whole new party, you can import your characters from other EA games, so from First Bard's Tale, Ultima 3 Exodus and Wizardry. 6 cities and 25 dungeons is a lot of content to cover, and Bard's Tale 2 does it well. So if you're into classic CRPGs, the Destiny Knight is definitely something you should try. The big deal is precisely what the title says, all because it's a very unusual title, for the time that is. And if I'm to be honest, I've never played it and I just learned about it and I'm stunned because it reminds me of a modern multiplayer game Overcooked but in single player only. Or maybe Cook Serve Delicious. One of the two. Anyway, there was no games like that in the 80s and the big deal was the first. I think. I hope. And if not, feel free to correct me below. Now, I've been talking for a while and really said nothing about it, but it's cause I wanted a bit more gameplay for it to be shown before I get to the heart of the thing. In the big deal, you play as a kitchen robot. Not one that's used to blend things and such, but actual robot that happens to be employed in the kitchen of a fast food joint. And your name is Floyd. Your task is theoretically pretty simple. Upon receiving orders, you have to prepare them and send them away. The thing is, you don't control Floyd directly, but issue him orders via a series of menu systems. Each meal preparation consists of a series of steps that need to be taken in the right order. For instance, getting ingredients, washing them, cutting, frying, setting up the plates, etc. Sometimes you'll need to add spices or ketchup and mayo. And the aim of the game is to serve as many customers as possible as efficiently as you can. Up to 3 meals can be pre-programmed so that you won't have to prepare them step by step, and you better choose well and have those set to the most often ordered items. The idea behind the game is incredibly unique and I'm honestly keen on giving it a proper go as it sounds hella fun, especially that both graphics and sounds are top notch. Blood and Guts is a game that's easy to misunderstand by just focusing on the title. I mean, it seems as if it should have been some kind of a walking beat-up similar to Golden Axe or maybe a versus fighter of sorts, and it's neither. What it is though is actually a multi-event sports quote-unquote simulation that instead of regular Olympic disciplines, serves various violent competitions in a Viking setting. Which, you know, however you wanna look at it, is a breath of fresh air in the sea of near-identical sport games. So Blood and Guts features 10 disciplines. Tug of War, which is precisely that, Tower Jump, which is a long jump but you're launching from a tower and have to land on your head, Rock Roller, where you push a boulder up the hill and who reaches top first wins, Beer Drinking, whomever finishes the mug first wins, Human Hit, where you throw stones at the person, A virtual in-game person, I must add, to keep YouTube censoring bots at ease, I'm afraid. Pole fight, which pits you against opponent fighting with sticks over a chasm. Cat throwing, a reason why this game would have never came out today, but for all intents and purposes, that's your regular hammer throw. Mountain walk, which is a crossing between two mountains walking on a rope. Axe throwing, where players take turns throwing axes at each other. And last but not least, arm wreck, which is joystick distraction inducing arm wrestling. The only downside to Blood and Guts really, other than the unfortunate title that is the fact that only up to 2 players can compete against each other. But on the plus side, the winner gets to witness loser's decapitation, so that's that. I'm not sure about its origins, but BMX Simulator always felt to me like a budget game. It's an overhead BMX simulator where you get to race against CPU or another player on 7 different and filled with ramps, steep turns and bumps racetrack. The player who manages to complete entire cup, so 3 laps on all 7 races with the best total time, wins. The more time you have left when you complete each track, the more points you get. And each consecutive track features a more strict time limit. If by any chance you fail to the unforgiving timer, it's an instant game over. BMX Simulator was a part of a larger overarching series consisting also of ATV Simulator, Grand Prix Simulator, Professional Ski Simulator, and eventually its own successor, Professional BMX Simulator. The game was fun with another player, but I never enjoyed it against CPU. It just lacked something special that would glue me to the screen for longer than just a couple of minutes. Bombjack originally came out in the arcades, but due to its huge popularity, very quickly spawned hordes of ports to all systems that could run it, and on some that couldn't and really shouldn't. And C64's Bombjack was the bomb. It's fast, features pretty nice graphics, especially in the 5 unique backgrounds, and it's genuinely fun. You're Jack, a superhero who tries to deactivate all bombs in each of the levels. While they can be quote-unquote collected in any order, the correct one is always indicated by the flashing, and doing so rewards additional points. The levels feature enemies who either move in pre-assigned paths or are always homing at you. Every once in a while a circle-shaped bonus pickup will appear and when collected will offer a boon. And it's either bonus points, extra life or turning enemies into motionless blobs. Kinda like my ex, who then can be picked up for points. Also, kinda like my ex. I wouldn't say that Bombjack is a one-to-one conversion from the arcades, but it's a bloody good one nonetheless, even if a bit on the tough side for me to truly enjoy. Bounder is an arcade game where you're controlling a tennis ball bouncing on the platform suspended high above the ground. You must bounce it avoiding enemies, passing the walls and trying not to plummet off the edge of the course. Failing any of these conditions results in a loss of 1 of your 7 lives. The floor that you bounce on is composed out of tiles, and while most are just that, so tiles, some are special. So, there are power squares which will push the ball forward allowing for longer jumps, and tiles with question marks, which may contain extra lives and additional jumps that you can use in bonus levels. But, and that's a big one, they may also instantly kill you, so they're a gamble. Bonus screens are accessed every time after the regular level is completed. Bounder is an unusual game, but because of that and because of how well it's designed, it's a pleasure to play. Cauldron 2 The Pumpkin Strikes Back, other than being uniquely named, is an interesting run and jump platformer, but without running and with extra jumping. So it's kinda jump and jump platformer, if you will. You're a pumpkin, and that's not an endearment, you are one. And you jump and jump some more, then even more, on top of these aerial jumps, all along the huge 128 rooms in size platforming castle. Now, you may be wondering what is the purpose of all that jumping. Well, an evil witch brought evil and darkness to the Enchanted Woods, and the only way to save and restore it to its former glory is to get a lock of her hair and then take it to the cauldron and cast a spell of undoing. Which, you know, you're jumping to achieve, right? In a castle you get to meet many of Witch's henchmen and you'll have to either pass or shoot them to get to her and get some of her hair. Wow, that's a tongue twister. And then finally to the Cauldron. Cauldron was a pretty popular game, and if you give it a chance and play it, you'll understand why. Championship Wrestling is an arcade versus fighting game that was originally created with WWF license in mind, but upon failing to secure it, it was released with 8 fictional fighters. And they are the Berserker, Purple Haze, H. Manslayer, Zeke Weasel, Prince Vicious, Colonel Ruski, Casey Colossus and Xanto Claw. Coincidentally, they all sound like names for weed strains. The game also features a whopping for the time number of moves, as there's 25 different ones, likes of leg drops, spin kicks, body slams, rope bounces and flying drop kicks among them. It is even possible to throw the opponent off the screen. The graphics are pretty decent too, especially the face close-ups of all wrestlers, which are expectedly over the top. Up to 2 players can enjoy Championship Wrestling, and if you're into the sport, you'll love the game. Thunder, Pilot of the Future sports an incredible title. and while being an adventure game with some action elements, feels a lot like a comic book, which I suppose is good as it's based on one. Earth receives a communication broadcast from an alien known as Mikie, and he threatens to destroy the planet with a hollowed-out asteroid unless he is made master of the galaxy. Now, I don't know how much say we had in the future of the galaxy in 1986, but clearly much more than we do now. Upon hearing that, Dender gathers his posse of Professor Peabody, his friend Digby and an alien companion Stripey, and they travel to the asteroid on a spaceship named Anastasia to stop evil Mikie. Gameplay-wise, it reminds me a little of later, early Sierra adventure games, but without need of typing in commands. It's obviously not the same as those were, but it feels similar. Deactivators is a puzzle game with some arcade elements. You're in control of bomb disposal robots known as Deactivators, and you must use them to, well, you guessed right, deactivate bombs planted in 5 research complexes. Each building is a level that requires completion before you can move to the next. To dispose of the bomb, you must have your Deactivators throw them to adjacent rooms until eventually they can be thrown out through the exit. If they fail and the bomb explodes in any room, everything inside it is destroyed and prevents you from completing a level. Security droids hang around some rooms and they serve as an obstacle that wants to destroy your Deactivators. They are best disposed of by luring them into a hole. Computer room allows you to use teleports and turn off force fields using circuit boards hidden throughout the levels. Deactivators is not an easy game, so if anything, I'd suggest trying to map out the rooms for easier gameplay. It may cause you to fail quite a few times, but after you've done it, the game will be easier. The Detective is a detective/mystery adventure game that's surprisingly fun. I mean, there's not much action in it, but it feels as if you were constantly involved in something. And given that it's timed, adds to this feeling an urgency. You're placed in shoes of a Scotland Yard detective who arrives at the McFangus estate in London. That happens to be neighbouring the McCrabs estate and Sir Stinky Pants mansion too. Oh my god, naming in games is so crazy. Oh, and obviously the latter two are not really in the game. Anyway, Angus McFangus has been murdered and you're tasked with collecting enough evidence to find and reveal the murderer. The house is filled with clues and other useful items that can be all examined, manipulated and even used. You can only carry up to 6 at the time and can question people around the mansion too, interrogating them, asking about objects and other characters. Every once in a while another murder may take place involving one of the in-house characters, so keep that in mind and more importantly, remember that the clock keeps ticking. Saying that Druid is a Gauntlet clone is technically not wrong, because it is, but it's also a little disservice to the game as it's enhanced as compared to arcade original. So it's a top-down, always scrolling fantasy shooter where you lead a titular druid through 8 mazes trying to destroy 4 magic skulls hidden within them. As you go about it, you're obviously ambushed by hordes of enemies which you can dispose of with spells of water, fire or electricity. All of these have limited ammo however. But you're not helpless, you also have 3 other spells at your disposal. Invisibility, which works exactly how you think it does. Summon Golem, which too works like you think it does, with a caveat that if there's someone with you, they can grab a second joystick and control the Golem to help you. And finally, a spell that destroys all enemies on screen. You can also pick up and carry keys with you that can be used to open locked doors. Duh. From time to time you'll stumble upon a shop in which you can purchase either more keys or charges for your weapons. I believe I called it ammo earlier on, right? Oh, whatever. Keep in mind though that you can only make 1 purchase per shop, so it's wise to buy what you need the most. Pentagrams on the ground that are found here and there will restore your health, so get to those whenever you get a chance. If you like Gauntlet, chances are you'll enjoy Druid as well. Empire, aka Star Empire, is a space combat and trading game that places you in shoes, or no, actually not in shoes, in a command chair of a pilot in the early days of space colonization. Your ultimate goal is to build a great galactic empire protected by a huge frontier shield network. But before you're anywhere even remotely close to that, you'll explore 64 star systems, take missions in star bases, upgrade your ship and pick up supplies. Space is not empty and safe however, and you'll be constantly attacked by enemy alien ships which have to be disposed of. As you progress in the game you'll achieve a lot. You'll create a vaccine that will combat plague which destroys the systems it infects, you'll get bigger and better ships and even purchase your own star bases, effectively starting your own empire, just to slowly with time expand it all over the universe. While Empire's graphics are rather simple, the gameplay is really addicting once you get into it. So if anything I just said sounds interesting to you, give it a try. And must explore Cursed Kingdom of Torod to find and recover 4 lost charms of eternal youth. Only in exchange for this, the evil queen will relinquish her grasp on your kingdom and lift the curse. You start the game with no weapons, but soon enough you find an enchanted crystal that grants you a power to zap enemies at distance. The game is huge and consists of 500 screens filled to the brim with Evil Queen's forces that need to be destroyed. But as you do so looking for the charms, you'll come across inhabitants of the land in their homes, and you can trade with them for spells, information and items. Which is important because while many things can be picked up lying around in random spots, there are those that can only be traded for. The game also allows for stealing of items, which is quite tricky, and if you fail, you may face the charges, and if unsuccessful defending yourself in a minigame, you'll be found guilty and executed, lowering your life count by 1. I don't know why, but when I look at Firelord, I feel no melancholy at all. Perhaps I haven't played it long enough to develop enough memories of it, or it was just not something I liked. We'll never know. Fist II: The Legend Continues is like a child between Way of the Exploding Fist and Target Renegade. But a child that did not take what's best from its parents, but what's forgettable, and ended up being less interesting than either of them. So it's a side-scrolling beat-em-up in the vein of Target Renegade, but taking place on a single plane only, with no vertical movement and a lot of annoying backtracking. And Way of the Exploding Fist's combat, just not as fun. When put together it's a decent game, especially in the quote-unquote parents wouldn't exist, but since they do, and you've played them, you expect so much more from the child and it just keeps failing to deliver. Fist II is not a bad game, let me make that clear. It's just a victim of having to follow the Way of the Exploding Fist, one of the best games on the system, which is also something that both Cannon Fodder 2 and Chaos Engine 2 on Amiga had to face, both being pretty good games unable to surpass cult classic that the predecessors were. If the footage in the background looks like fun to you though, you'll most likely enjoy the game, so just maybe base your opinion about it on that. Flash Gordon is an arcade video game based on a comic strip of the same name, and I gotta be honest with you guys, while I loved the movie, somehow I missed the game completely, and everything I'll say here is from what I learned online. So it is composed out of 3 individual and completely unique levels. First, set in maze-like jungle of Arboreum, from which Flash Gordon seeks for a way to escape. Second is side view fighting stage, where Flash faces Prince Barin. And the final level is a 3D style shooter viewed from the first person perspective, where Flash on a flying cycle is in pursuit of Ming the Merciless, the villain of the movie. Looking at it today, given when it came out, both graphic and sounds, especially Rob Hubbard's music, along with 3 different game modes, presented itself as a pretty decent value for the money, and may have been one of the better movie tie-ins for the time. Footballer of the Year is a very unique take on football management games. Instead of controlling a whole team, you're managing a singular striker throughout his career. You start in Division 4 with an ultimate goal of becoming the titular Footballer of the Year. At the beginning you have very little money, which is crucial as it's used to buy goal cards, up to 3 of which could be used during matches to create goal opportunities. So, if by any chance all 3 would work, a hat-trick is possible. All the actions during the game that you take part in are viewed from the first-person perspective, and they can be either attack on the goal or penalties. If you fail at shooting plenty enough times, you may lose your spot in the team. If you score often, you may end up being rewarded with a transfer to a higher league. Make no mistake though, Footballer of the Year is neither great playing nor good looking game, but it's very unusual in its theme, and for this reason alone, it secures its spot on this list. Friday the 13th is a horror/action-adventure game based on a movie of the same title. 10 of your friends are lost in the surroundings of Crystal Lake Holiday Camp not far from Jason's grotto, and it's up to you to find and kill Jason before he kills you or your friends. The action takes place in the camp and you can freely walk around it, entering buildings that are there. Jason and other characters do the same. It's worth pointing out that he will often disguise himself as one of your teenage friends. To find him, you can hit your friends once to see if it's them or to uncover Jason. There are a lot of objects around the camp that can be picked up and used as weapons, things like pitchfork, machete or a chainsaw. The game is composed out of 5 levels, and in each you assume control of another of the teenagers. Depending on how many of your friends survive when Jason is killed, bonus points are added, and then the game starts again with another character. Gauntlet is a top-down fantasy-themed maze shooter and a port of the same title game from the arcades. Unlike the original though, only 2 people can play the game on C64, which you know is less than 4 but still fun, especially that there's 512 dungeons to beat. There's no real aim to Gauntlet other than having to survive as long as possible and accumulate the most points, which kinda fits as the time that you have left is also your health meter. There are 4 characters to choose from, which also represent 4 different fantasy classes/races. So there's Thor the warrior, Questor the elf, and he's the race representative, because however you wanna look at it, elf is not a class. Then there's Tyra the Valkyria and Merlin the wizard. Warrior is strong but slow, Valkyria is middle ground between all other classes, elf is weak and fast, and wizard is fast with strong magic, but he's very weak. Given his advanced age, however, it's not a surprise really. Gauntlet is one of those titles that's entertaining because it was designed to be fast and frantic. and it delivers most of its fun from pure action rather than objectives or goals that most other games tend to have. It's a great game to fire up once in a while, cause it's never boring. Ghosts and Goblins is an arcade classic and a sideways scrolling action platformer, in which you play as Sir Arthur, who has to save his beloved from the clutches of an evil demon. Not that there are any other kinds of demons. Elite, the publisher, requested from the developer that the C64 version should not load any extra data from tape or disk drive and should fit entirely in memory. And while 64 KB of RAM was nothing to scoff at on 8-bit systems, it was hardly enough to fit the whole game. So the decision was made that out of 7 levels present in the original, only first 4 would be available on C64, and last 2 would be swapped so that the game would not end on a bridge level. While disappointing because of the 3 levels being missing entirely, the remaining 4 are really well brought down to Commodore's Micro and very different from one another. Ghosts and Goblins features few different weapons and an armor that serves as an extra life falling off of your character when hit rather than having him die straight away. There are also same enemies and bosses as there were in arcade. It uses a 3-minute timer, or 2 minutes and 59 seconds to be precise, for each level, so while being devilishly difficult, it's also unforgiving in how long you can try to complete it. Ghosts and Goblins is a difficult but very fun game, and you will no doubt find yourself playing it more than once. Gradius, aka Nemesis, is a sci-fi horizontally scrolling shoot-em-up that is another game proving C64's prowess in arcade conversions. C64's port was made by Konami themselves, so the original developer of the game. You're flying from left to right, destroying any and all enemies in 8 different levels. The game features few upgrades, ranging from speed up through extra missiles, double grenades, laser cannon, multi-drones and shield. All of this can be picked up while playing, and other than double and laser, all can be mixed in any combination to better your ship. Graphically, the game does not stun, and while your ship and enemy sprites graphics are pretty nice, the backgrounds leave a bit to be desired and look empty and plain. Sound-wise, personally I have no complaints other than a small bug in the second level, which is more of a nuisance rather than the issue. Even if a bit repeatable because of the constant enemy movement patterns, Gradius is really fun, and all fans of arcade shooters will no doubt find themselves playing it time after time. So, if you're one of these, the game is a must-have. 10th Frame is a 10-pin bowling simulation for up to 8 players and easily my most favorite bowling game until Kingpin Bowling that released years later on Amiga and PC. The game is viewed from behind the bowler's back perspective and current player's scoreboard is displayed on the top of the screen. Before starting up the run, you can set up your bowler's position and target marker 2. When that's all done, you hold that fire button, which will fill up the power meter, and the longer it is held, the faster the ball will be thrown. When the meter goes down after power is set, its stop position will determine the strength of the hook. While 10 Frame is fine alone, it gets most fun with others. Additional and rarely used feature that's a cherry on pie of this already sweet game is a function allowing to printing out scores for all players after the match ended. Unlike its arcade counterpart, 1942 on C64 is single player only and it's obviously a vertically scrolling shoot 'em up. You're a pilot of jet fighter during World War II and you're tasked with destroying any and all enemy's airborne forces. If you miss any of the planes, they will come back with another wave or loop back at the bottom of the screen to come back from the top again. While the gameplay is pretty solid, it's not flawless, the graphics are quite simple and at times, especially when looking at the landscapes, may even feel uninspired. Additionally, the collision detection leaves a bit to be desired. In other words, it's not unusual for your shots to just go through enemy plane's wings without hitting it. Such. Other than the shots, you have a loop that you can use 3 times per life to save yourself from ongoing enemy fire. So yeah, 1942 is solid but not as good as it could have been, and it feels like a lot of shots have been taken with this one and most missed the mark. It was an easy port to make given the limited as compared to other shmups content, but someone dropped the ball and no one cared to give the game any more polish. Green Beret, aka Russian Attack, is based on an arcade game and it's a side-scrolling action adventure. So, you're walking from... you're running like crazy from left to right wielding just a knife. In reality, that's how we get psychopathic mass murderers, in games it's how we get a hero. Your goal is to free POWs in 4 levels that the game is composed of, all representing different locales. So, Missile, Harbor, Bridge and Prison Camp. The enemies come constantly at you from both left and right and you have to dispose of them fast, because if any of them does as little as touch you, you die. Since they never stop showing up angry and blood-hungry though, you should aim to run as fast as possible not to get overwhelmed. You get an extra life every 25,000 points and believe me, in Green Beret that's not nearly often enough. Gunship is a combat helicopter simulation tackling one of the most prominent attack helicopters of the 20th century, the AH-64A Apache. The simulation depicts weapon and flight systems and performance as realistically as it's possible on C64. The assortment of weapons to pick, while not massive, is quite varied and features a 30mm cannon, laser-guided Hellfire missiles, cluster of bombardment rockets, and air-to-air missiles. The game features training and 4 different increasingly more difficult combat scenarios taking place in respectively Vietnam, Nicaragua, Middle East and Europe. While I was never very proficient at flight combat simulations, I can definitely appreciate one for what it is. And Gunship is ace. Hacker 2: The Doomsday Papers is direct successor to earlier Hacker, and picks up the story directly after the first game, assuming that you succeeded in it. Once again, you're tasked with controlling a robot to infiltrate a secure facility in order to retrieve so-called Doomsday Papers from a well-guarded vault. It is crucial, however, that you succeed to ensure the security of United States. But there's a twist, which I'm not gonna spoil here cause it's a good one. Anyway, you're controlling the game using the 4-monitor system, one of which displays the minimap. You must avoid the guards at all costs too, as they will chase you, and when they manage to get your robot, it will be crushed. There are few robots that you can take control of, but they're not limitless, so keep that in mind. Hacker 2, same as the first one, is an unusual game and one deserving a longer review and not just few sentences, as it's impossible to describe it in detail in such a short time. Highway Encounter is an action strategy game viewed from an isometric perspective in which you must safely and successfully deliver a bomb along the stretch of a highway into an alien base at the end of it. Sounds ridiculous? It kinda is if you think about it, but if you don't, then it's pretty fun. The game consists of 30 screens and you play as a robot eerily similar to Daleks from Doctor Who, and have to clear the path for the bomb that is constantly pushed by other robots like yourself. They happen to also be your extra lives, so there's that. When all extra spare lives are lost, you have to push the bomb yourself. Highway Encounter is a very interesting title design-wise, and I remember that I had a lot of fun playing it, mainly because of how unique it felt, unlike anything else. But it's also another one of those titles that are victims to lazy converting and looks as if nothing was changed when it moved to C64 from ZX Spectrum, which is a shame because it could have at the very least look and sound a lot better. Hopeless is a state of mind I experience every morning when I wake up and have to go to work. I honestly am ready to win a lottery and become a traveling multi-millionaire, spending a month here, a month there, experiencing everything the world has to offer. Not worrying about the next bill or what may happen a day or two from today. Oh well, it doesn't look like it's gonna happen anytime soon. Anyway, Hopeless is also an action-adventure game for Commodore 64 in which you play as an astronaut who has to save his fiancée, Jane, from clutches of the most wanted person in the galaxy, the so-called Manic Monk. So you'll travel through many strangely shaped space bases suspended in the void and patrolled by monstrous extraterrestrial creatures. You traverse the game world by walking or via jetpack, the latter using fuel so should not be overused. And you have a laser shield, karate chop and defense shield to protect yourself against enemies. Odd mixture of skills and gear really. While you move between those structures, you need to sabotage 15 hearts that correspond to Manic Monk's defense system, deactivating gates leading to his lair. Once they're all open, you can face the villain and save your love. Hypa-Ball is a futuristic sci-fi sports game for 1 or 2 players. You can play as either Hawks or Vipers and assemble your 3-man team out of available 10 players, each with their own unique stats of strength, agility and speed. The basket, which serves as a sort of two-sided goal, moves up and down in the middle of the screen on a pole, and both teams have to catch a ball, pass it between their players and shoot it into said basket. 2 of the players on your team are in the air at 2 different altitudes and 1 always stays on the ground to collect the balls that fall down. You're controlling the player that's closest to the ball in the air and simultaneously the one on the ground too. Each player can hold the ball for up to 2.5 seconds only, so the game between seasoned players can be really fast and frantic. Not to mention fun. Infiltrator is an unusual game. It's a flight combat simulator mixed with an action-adventure. You take a role of a James Bond-type agent whose objective is to fly a combat helicopter to enemy bases and then infiltrate their compounds, all to stop their mad leader. The game is divided into 3 missions, each of them split into 2 sections. First, in a helicopter where you fly towards enemy installation, fighting off enemy forces if necessary. And believe me, it will be. And second, on foot inside enemy bases where you have to locate and retrieve security card hidden in a cabinet somewhere. Once found, the card opens the door to the objective of each mission. And these objectives are very varied, from neutralizing dangerous gas to rescuing captive scientists and everything in between. Return flight is always shorter and less dangerous with far fewer enemies present. I'm not sure that I've given justice to Infiltrator in these few short sentences, but it was one of the most unique titles mixing genres quite successfully. And most importantly, doing it while still being pretty fun. International Karate is easily second best versus fighting game on C64, only bested by its own successor, International Karate Plus. Come to think of it, I think it's pronounced karate. Never mind. It simulates karate competition in which two fighters face each other in a bout for points. Each fight lasts 30 seconds and players get either a full or a half point for successful hits. When the time runs out, fighter with the most points wins. If there's a draw, little wrinkled old dude on the side says so. He's there to point out the obvious, but every sport competition needs one. It's a requirement. There's just no such thing as too many old wrinkled dudes, and every game should have at the very least one too. If you lose, the tournament is over and you get your score along with the belt color that you have reached. In 2-player mode, a fight lasts 60 seconds and there are 12 points players can compete for. A successful hit always rewards one, and being hit subtracts one from your count. When time runs out, or one of the players loses all points, it's the end of the fight and the whole match consists of 2 rounds. Graphics-wise, International Karate is just beautiful, featuring lush backgrounds of iconic locations around the world and beautifully animated fighters on the foreground with a dried-up grey racing standing shakingly in the background. It's a looker. Sounds are appropriately good too. Sure, there's no explosive special moves and no difference other than the kimono color between the fighters, but International Karate is a proof that Commodore could, if only devs would give it a bit more attention. I mean, comparing this and Street Fighter 2 ports to the system is unfair. This looks amazing and Street Fighter 2 is more akin to a dog's poo with a grass straw sticking out of it. Sure, it's bigger content-wise, so someone could say that some omissions to the original content/quality had to be made, but C64 had a disk drive, so there's no excuse for it really. Anyway, IK along with IK Plus are the most technical versus fighters on the system and permanent spots in each of C64's owners' collections. Or at the very least they should be. Jack the Nipper is an action-adventure game where you play as an infant prankster. And your aim is pretty simple, while also being quite unusual. You have to become the most naughty baby out there, all without getting caught and spanked. To the point that there's a naughty-o-meter at the bottom of the screen tracking your various shenanigans. If you get spanked 5 times, it's game over. On your mischievous adventures, you're going to visit many locations around the town, from kindergarten through police station and side streets to the museum. To cause mayhem, you'll jump on things, pick up objects and drop them where they cause most trouble, and in general will cause chaos everywhere. You are an infant force of distraction after all, and you will raise hell wherever you'll go. Jack the Nipper is one of the most unique games of the year, as it's not clearly representative of any particular genre, but a fun romp on its own, the way it is. Wikipedia page for Knight's games is entirely empty. Now, that's a waste, cause despite not being the best game out there, it definitely deserves much more than just a short note on who and when made it. I'm not sure I'm the one to fill it in, but I can at the very least shed more light on it here. In essence, it's a tournament between the two knights for points, thematically different but mechanically very similar to Epic's multi-discipline sport simulations like Winter or Summer Games. With a caveat that they take place in medieval times and many events are combat-based in one way or another. So, before each you get to choose the difficulty level and there's 8 disciplines to compete in. They are crossbow, archery, quarterstaff, ball and chain, which you may know under a different name and may live with you. In fact, she/he may sit next to you for all I know right now. Anyway, there is also pike staff, axemen and 2 types of sword fighting. Knight Games is a fun and unique take on multi-event sports games, and if you enjoy this, you'll love this game too. Koronis Rift was built upon the fractal environment technology LucasArts created for the earlier title we've covered few videos ago, Rescue on Fractalus. Other than that, it's an entirely different game. You control a rover with which you enter rifts on mysterious planet Koronis. Those rifts are protected by various in color and design alien saucers, and depending on their color, your weapons and shield may work better or worse on them. And part of the fun is figuring out which shield and weapon modules work best where. You can send out a drone to recover found modules that can be later equipped on your rover, analyzed in your ship or sold. Up to 6 of these modules can be installed at one time, and you can turn them on and off as you see fit to mix and match for the situation that you're facing at any given moment. The ultimate aim of the game is to locate and destroy Saucer Control Base Hulk, which is located in the 20th Rift. So yeah, that spoiled the game for you a little. Sorry. I don't feel like I gave the game the justice it deserved, but it was a pretty impressive title for the time it released in, and it's perhaps for the best I was so vague, as it's worth experiencing by yourself at least once. Labyrinth is a very important game. I'd risk saying that in a way it may be nearly as important as Maniac Mansion. Why, you may wonder? Well, it's LucasArts' first real adventure game and one that designs influenced years later aforementioned Maniac Mansion. It is loosely based on a movie of the same name, and as you travel the titular maze, solving puzzles and avoiding various dangers, you aim to locate and defeat the main antagonist, Jareth, all within the real-life 13 hours that the game gives you to do so. Yes, 13 hours of our real-life time. Labyrinth is unique because it serves as a mid-step between earlier command-line text parsers, which I despise with passion and hope will never resurface to see the sunlight ever again, and later LucasArts' modern point-and-click interface. It uses two scrolling wheels of words from which they are chosen to form basic sentences. While not as straightforward as Scum Engine's point-driven controls, it's much friendlier to use than having to type in all the commands. Interestingly enough, according to Wikipedia's records, the game was more popular in the US than the movie it was based on. Access Software's Leaderboard is the very first title in the long romance with golf simulations. In fact, out of 87 games that they released over the years, grand majority were golf simulations, and all were really good. Yep, not a single stinker. Sure, some were a bit mismatched, like Lynx on the Amiga that required a beefy system to be playable, but if you had one, it was amazing. Anyway, coming back to Leaderboard, it's a golf simulation where up to 4 players can compete in a sport against each other in one of the 4 different water-based courses. Upon its release, the game was praised for both very detailed graphics and unparalleled realism of gameplay, especially when it came to putting. And no wonder, as it quickly jumped the charts, becoming the very best-selling C64 game for year 1986 in the UK. If you have any sympathy for the sport, you should definitely try Leaderboard, as it holds up even today, nearly 40 years later. Madness is pure madness! Well, not really. It's a single-screen platformer with an unforgiving time limit to complete each of the 32 stages. In theory, it's a simple start-to-exit fare, but the catch is that the exit needs to be activated by lighting all the torches scattered all around the levels filled with various bodies, some of which follow pre-assigned paths, while others may chase you throughout the entire stage. Each consecutive level is more difficult than the last, and soon enough you'll find yourself creating complex plans for the routes you'll need to take to complete a particular stage, lighting all the torches and avoiding all enemies, not to end up in the dead end. Madness is very simple in its design, but that's good cause from the get-go you know what and how to do, and you just get served more and more demanding levels to beat. It's a natural and fun progression system that just works. Mafia dropped the mic on graphics entirely and focused on playability, and that's why it looks awful in its ASCII presentation but plays really well in the same time. You're in Chicago in the 1920s, and play either until the time runs out or till you reach the rank of Gangland King, and rob a cash transport and kill the mayor. Quite a lot of requirements, but it's not impossible. At the beginning of the game your character is created randomly out of few basic stats: energy, corresponding to his health, strength, responsible for the pace the energy is recovered at, intelligence, influencing the odds of crimes, and lastly brutality, which determines what kind of weapons you'll get access to. You obviously start at the very bottom of the barrel, committing smaller crimes like robberies, alcohol smuggling, etc. And as you rank up and progress, you'll gain access to other more lucrative crimes, if there's even such thing as a lucrative crime. At a certain point you'll be able to recruit a posse of up to 10 other gang members who will raise your chances at certain activities. The game is played in turns, each taking 1 month. During each turn you can walk around the town a certain distance and enter various buildings, in which you get to perform multiple actions. Whether you want to or not, sooner or later you'll encounter other gangs and the police, and will have to enter combat with either, which is also turn-based and viewed from the top-down perspective. Every turn you can either move your characters or attack. Losing combat doesn't end the game, and if by any reason, combat or otherwise, you'll end up in jail, it's also not a game over. But you lose precious time from your life. Mafia is a C64 exclusive that's unlike most other games, and despite its simple presentation, it's really fun, especially that it can be played by up to 4 players at once. You play as titular Mikie, and your aim is to deliver a love message to your girlfriend at school, but everything and everyone in 5 levels represented by different rooms in school seem to be bent on stopping you from doing so. Seemingly for no reason, just to mess with you. Each room is different, has its own music theme and possess a bit different challenge, and they are classroom, changing room, cafeteria, gym and schoolyard, all connected via school hall. To get to your girlfriend though, you need to collect all hearts in all levels. Each heart collected adds a letter to the top of the screen, and when the message is completed you can leave the room and go to the next. All the way through teachers, the janitor, school cook and other students among others will try to stop you. But there is no stronger force than love. Not even gravity of a situation dawning on someone who suddenly realized that they sold their pants in a room full of people. So sooner or later, you'll get to your girlfriend. I always liked Mikie. And I don't only mean my good buddy that I have drinks with each weekend, but the game. It's just fun. And I'm not sure much more needs to be said about it. Mission AD is an arcade flick screen shooter where you play as Ricochet, a super assassin, and are sent to an enemy bunker where you need to take out all the assassins before the time will run out. The bunker is made up out of 8 areas connected by transporters, and each screen is divided into 2 areas, lower and higher, connected by elevators. You're armed with a gun and your objective in each level is to kill a set number of opposing assassins before you can move to the next. Other than the assassins, an issue may be the guards, which don't directly target you but just shoot in panic left and right. They have to be either shot or avoided, whichever you prefer. Losing all the energy or having the time run out costs you one life. When all are lost, it's game over. Mission AD feels like a typical side-scrolling shooter from the latter half of the 80s and plays like that too. Mission Elevator is an action-adventure game where you play as an FBI agent trying to recover pieces of a bomb defusal code and then defuse the bomb itself. It has been hidden by an opposing intelligence agency on the top of a hotel skyscraper, and you're the only one fit for the job. And I gotta give it to you, you're awesome. No, really. By now, after whatever how many videos I've released, you've saved like at least a dozen or two countries, couple of universes, hundreds of ladies in distress and a kid or two. Clearly, there are no limits to what you can do. You rule. So, you're searching the hotel floors for hints on how to deactivate the bomb, and the hotel itself is divided into 9 sections, and each contains 2 hints. And they can be anywhere, under a chair, inside a plant pot, behind the painting, and to find them you'll need to search all objects you come across. Similarly, you would have in Impossible Mission. To move from one section to another you need a key to the emergency door. It is held by a porter who is behind one of the few blue doors on each level. The enemy agents can come anytime and from anywhere, kinda like diarrhea, and they always wear trench coats. And I have no bad pun for that. They have to be disposed of ASAP, because if you lose a life more than 8 times, it's game over. The Movie Monster game is a much improved version of Epix's earlier title Crash, Crumble and Chomp, and it puts you in feet, well, in pose or close really, of a monster that you choose and sends you on a mission. And it can be anything from destroying a particular well-known site, through rescuing your abducted young, to erasing a city from existence. You know, your basic Monster B-movie scenario. But as you go about that, destroying to your heart's content, the city does not just give up, and officials send police and army to stop you. Who those officials are? No one knows, but they're there and they want to make your day a really bad day. So, there will be cops, tanks and jets set against you, and you'll need to dispose of all of these too. Occasionally, even another monster may stand in your way. The Movie Monster game is fun in its crazy distraction-based design, and if you like the earlier title, you'll no doubt love this one too. But one thing I feel worth mentioning is that pre-game setup along with the game title happens in a sort of movie theater, where before each game Epix does not waste time and advertises their other titles. Usually I would have been a bit put off by it, but it's so well thought out and put together that I don't mind it too much and actually appreciate it. Toasty! Mugsy's Revenge is a strategy and management game starting in 1919, where you take a role of Mugsy, a gangster who has just been released from prison. And as pop culture showed us, most people released from prison get straight back into crime. Now, don't get me wrong, I know it's bullcrap and the statistics from the movies are anything but accurate, but this game kinda bases its premise on that. So, the aim of Mugsy's Revenge is to make a fortune smuggling alcohol. The game is played in turns and each one represents 1 year. Each year you make a set of certain decisions, how much alcohol to buy, which stuff to assign to which activity, and how much money to spend on bribes. The game ends after 10 years with a repeal of prohibition. While majority of the options are taken by text interface, there is an arcade minigame within Mugsy's Revenge where you control Mugsy and have to shoot assassins that are sent to kill you. Graphically, given the static in majority of cases presentation of the game, it's pretty nice looking, often comic book-like, which definitely makes for a far more enjoyable play sessions. Murder on the Mississippi is a detective adventure game in which you must solve a mystery murder on a luxury ship Delta Princess. It is loosely based on Agatha Christie's Death on the Nile. Traveling from New Orleans to St. Louis, our duo of detectives, Sir Charles and Sir Watson, are mixed up in the murder case by chance, which now they must solve. Other than the 2 detectives, there's 8 people on the ship and each of them can be spoken to once per each new piece of information. So it is crucial to talk to everyone whenever something is discovered, as when something new will surface, all the previous informations become inaccessible, and suspects can talk about only current information. Which, in my eyes, is just bad design that can lead to being irreversibly stuck in a game, unable to progress any further. If you like detective-style adventures, Murder on the Mississippi is definitely one to try out, though keep in mind what I said, and that 2 of the rooms are booby-trapped, and if you're not gonna react soon enough upon entering, it will lead to an instant game over, which is beyond annoying. A villain Sirius T. Gross has built an artificial asteroid Telos and directed it towards the Earth. Only the Nemesis organization's mobile attack droid 471, in short N.O.M.A.D, can save the Earth now. And guess who's gonna get to steer it? Yep, it's you again. N.O.M.A.D is a top-down shooter where you travel through a city fighting enemy forces. Initially the game is very linear, but with time it features various junctions, so you'll be looking for many different routes to your objectives, and there will be quite a lot of backtracking. You'll fight numerous enemies, you'll destroy their spawn points, wall-mounted guns, and will look for switches and then doors that they open. As engineers behind the city's design did not mount switches next to the doors that they open for some reason. The controls of N.O.M.A.D take a little while to get used to, but when you do, they feel quite natural. While there are definitely better shooters on C64, N.O.M.A.D's expansive world makes up for it with a deep sense of discovery. Ninja is a small game. No, really. Given a bit of practice, it could perhaps be completed in around 10 minutes, and there's really no extra content that would encourage consecutive playthroughs. But it's not a bad game at all, and that's why it's disappointing that it's so short. Anyway, it's a side-scrolling versus fighting game, so not really a beat-em-up, in which you play as a ninja who has to go through series of opponents, defeat them and collect 7 idols. If you have all 7, it's a winner-winner chicken dinner. And that's why you get for it too, a single word, winner. Now, I know that this 8-bit system had limited capabilities, but we've seen plenty enough games already to know for a fact that C64 was capable of much more. All that said, before you're proficient enough to complete the game straight up, you'll have quite a bit of fun playing it, a few good times failing. And other than the martial arts combat you'll engage in, you can also use daggers and shurikens, which both make the combat encounters considerably faster and easier. Panther is an isometric scrolling shoot-em-up set on the space colony Xenon that has been attacked by aliens. You fly a fighter transport ship codenamed Panther and have to evacuate remaining colonists while fighting off waves of alien ships. Panther's controls are unusual. You can move left and right and change your ship's height, there's no reverse though. The movement of Panther is dependent on its height, so the higher it is, the faster it moves. Enemies change their height too, and their shadows should help you indicate how high they are. To evacuate people, you have to land near them and wait till all of them enter your ship. After all levels are complete, the game circles back to the first as it is played for points and you get the most, saving people. And there's no real ending other than the death. Wow, that's either deep or painfully realistic. Oh, I'm gonna make some enemies with this one. But I never really understood Paperboy's popularity. I mean, it's fun and all for a game or two, but definitely not something I would have assigned a cult status to. Anyway, Paperboy originated in the arcades, and given its huge popularity, it was ported to anything that had any kind of processor in it. Kinda like Doom was in the early 2000s and then Skyrim in 2010s. So, there was virtually no system without Paperboy's port in the late 80s. Simply put, in Paperboy you're just that, a bike newspaper boy delivering daily press to your subscribers and throwing it into potential future ones' homes too. You can carry up to 8 newspapers at the time, but there are bundles along the way that you can pick up to replenish your stock and keep on delivering. If that was it though, there wouldn't have been anything special to the game, and it would have ended up rather dull. This is not the case however, and anything and everything that will come your way will try to stop you from fulfilling your deliveries and earning enough money for your first pack of cigarettes and first beer. So, pedestrians, construction workers, dogs, rolling tires, remote-controlled cars, lawnmowers, children, skateboarders, limousine snobs, Harley rockers, Grim Reaper, fences, curbs and manhole covers, all of them will try to impede your progress in an active or passive way. Life of a paperboy is not easy after all. So keep all of this in mind and, well, good luck. Parallax is a sci-fi top-down multi-directional arcade shoot-em-up. The AI has taken over and the world is controlled by the computer known as the Big One. Its code and security measures are way too difficult to crack for you, so you must find scientists who can. They are not too keen on cooperating though, so you must drag them and bring them to the Big One, where they will unlock one letter of a passphrase each. It sounds easier than it actually is though, as while you fly around looking for the scientists, the Big One keeps throwing enemy units at you that you need to dispose of promptly, cause they're more than capable of ganging up on you. Interestingly enough, in Parallax you can get out of your ship and patrol the area on foot. You can buy improved weapons and shield recharges too to stay on top of the AI menace and its forces. While the premise and graphics of Parallax are top-notch, the gameplay feels a bit odd, as if it was just a mashup of many ideas put together and asked to work well. Don't get me wrong, Parallax is not a bad game, it just feels more like an alpha than a complete product. Phantasie II is a second in the series of role-playing games. Technically speaking, nothing has changed from year prior's Phantasie, it still uses the same engine and combat mechanics, and yet it's improved upon considerably. Quests and puzzles are both longer and more difficult than earlier on, and most importantly a new attack was added for all classes, Toss, which allows you to throw objects at an enemy. And it may not seem like nothing, but against those that are immune to conventional attacks it may prove to be a life-saving measure. The exploration of the overworld and dungeons is as fun as it was in the first game, and combat is enjoyable too. It didn't hurt that the story of the game is pretty good too, with Dark Lord Nicodemus once more causing trouble, this time by creating an evil orb and casting a curse on the beautiful land of Feronara, enslaving its people. As it's easy to figure out, you have to find and destroy the orb. If after hearing all this you came to the conclusion that Phantasie II was just more of the same, so Phantasie 1 but with little more of everything, then you're correct, because that's what it is precisely. And it's not bad at all, as it's a full-fledged RPG experience and there weren't many of these other than the Ultima and Wizardry series back then on C64. While you can import your party from the first game, all of their equipment is removed and most experience and gold too. So it offers just a tiny improvement over a freshly created one. And if you manage to roll good characters at the beginning, importing older may even bring worse characters than those new ones are. In 1986, Imagine Software ported Konami's Ping Pong from the arcades to Commodore 64, and it was awesome. Not epic enough, I think, let me rephrase that. In the year 1986 of our Lord, prophet from the Church of Imagine Software walked the earth among mere mortals, and seeing how they missed something and their souls were empty, he proclaimed, "Let there be Ping Pong again." And it was glorious, and it will play like a charm in 1 or 2 players mode with 5 levels of difficulty to choose from. And while it was not a looker, Prophet added, "What it lacks in graphics, let it make up for in playability and pure fun." And it also did. And from then onward, 1986 was known forever as the year of miracles and Ping Pong on C64. Honestly though, I don't know what more to say about it really. It looks and sounds okay and plays really good. And it's Ping Pong, so yeah, here we go. I've seen comparisons between Pirates of the Barbary Coast to Sid Meier's Pirates, and it's unfair to either. For one, Pirates of the Barbary Coast, while tackling a similar subject, is its own game. And for two, Sid Meier's Pirates is much better. Anyway, for the sake of not mixing it up with the cult classic, I will call our subject game from now on Barbie. So, Barbie is a maritime trading and strategy game set along the north coast of Africa, where you captain Articus and you fall a victim to a terrible scheme. A lecherous pirate Bloodthroat kidnapped your daughter Catherine during a stopover in Casablanca, and he now demands 50,000 gold pieces as a ransom in only 30 days. And you have nowhere near the amount needed. Clearly he picked the wrong target. But you love your daughter more than your barrel of grog, your trusty parrot, or your wooden leg, so you decide to trade your way to said riches. And by trading I mean a very broad definition known only to pirates such as yourself. So while you will be trading in ports, you will also trade other pirates' lives for gold, fighting them whenever you get a chance. All the while searching for clues for Bloodthroat's hideout that's on an unknown island. Ship combat is real-time and shows your ship from behind all the cannons, which require loading, targeting and shooting done manually. It's easier said than done at first, but with time, you'll master it. I've no doubt about that. After defeating an enemy, you can choose either to seize his gold or grab his log containing useful information, often a hint towards Bloodthroat's hideout. Barbie is not as fun or as huge of a game as Pirates are, but it's pretty good in its own way despite that. Sci-Fi Trading Company is one of the first examples of roguelite games, even before the genre was even created and name for it coined, but it's one nonetheless. The aim of the game is to transport valuable cargo between starting and target planets through pirate-infested space as undamaged as possible, and there are 3 routes to choose from, each with different hazards on its way and corresponding to these different rewards. But before you take off, you have to pick a crew for each of your ship's departments, so for weapons, scanning, navigation, engineering and repair. All the changes that you want to make on the way you have to issue to your team members and not make them directly. So you have to prioritize, keeping in mind that at any point there may be more tasks to complete than crew to complete them. So for instance, when you are attacked by more than one enemy, you may need to assign someone to steer the ship, using evasive maneuvers, someone to keep life support in operation, someone to repair the damage and someone else to defend the ship. And since all of the crew members have different characters, some are more susceptible to stress than others. And when they stress, they can make mistakes. The game is not lost until you either have your ship destroyed beyond repair or when your cargo is completely looted. Sci-Fi is hectic fun, and that's the best way of describing it. It's similar to modern FTL with a slight difference that in FTL you're not delivering anything but are running away from something. So if you like roguelites or anything I just said sounds even remotely interesting, give it a go. Rambo is sent on a reconnaissance mission into a prison camp in Vietnam, where he's supposed to capture photographic evidence only. He finds his close friend Banks there, however, and decides to free him and wipe all the enemies out. And when did he historically ever fail at that kind of a mission? Rambo First Blood Part 2 is very similar to Commando, in that it's a top-down shooter with infinitely respawning enemies. It differs from Commando, however, because it's always scrolling and doesn't just move vertically upwards. You start with 3 weapons, knife, regular and explosive arrows, but soon enough you'll get your hands on considerably better gear. At the end of the game, while you're escaping with freed POWs in a copter, you'll face a boss, an enemy battle helicopter. Rambo is really fun, but also short, and if you know what and how to do it, it can be completed in around 10 minutes. Refs is probably the most authentic racing simulation on any of the 8-bit systems. It's a formula-free racer with realistic handling, controls, tire behavior and 2 tracks of real-life Silverstone and Brandes Hatch, both modeled to such degree that even lie of the land is represented in the game realistically. You can even adjust the aerodynamics of your car if you want to. You can, I can't because I'm too stupid to. Anyway, both opponent cars and your bolid's cockpit are beautifully for the capabilities of the system recreated in the game and animated smoothly. The only downside of the game is that the sound leaves a little to be desired, so you only ever hear your own car. If Refs looks to you oddly similar to F1 GP on the Amiga, then it's good, cause it could be considered its smaller brother as it was programmed by the legendary Geoff Cramont. A year after dropping Refs, Refs Plus was released and it featured 4 additional tracks and full joystick compatibility. If anything, Refs is a proof that even as little power-wise system as C64 could, if left in hands of talented people, offer a very realistic simulation experience. Saboteur is a game that I loved as a kid. And what's not to love here? There's a ninja that you get to play as, he infiltrates some kind of a secret gangster base / hideout, not unlike Bruce Lee did in Enter the Dragon, but more stealthily. And he can both fight in hand-to-hand combat and use various projectiles like shurikens. Your mission is to find the floppy disk with names of rebels, henceforth saving them from being eliminated by the villains of the game. For all intents and purposes, Saboteur is an action-adventure platformer where you travel deeper and deeper into the complex, fighting any and all enemies that you encounter in simplified beat-em-up style. My young imagination used to build scenarios around what was my ninja's real mission, and I had time of my life playing it. Today, it's not as engaging to me as it was back then, but melancholy prevails, albeit in a bit limited fashion. Saboteur is the only game that I know of even until today that offered a whopping 9 levels of difficulty choice before starting. It's just unseen. But here you go, Saboteur. Oh, and I always felt that Saboteur looked like ZX Spectrum port because of the graphics, even though as far as I know, it's actually not. The Sacred Armor of Anti-Riot, aka Rad Warrior, is one of the earliest examples of so-called Metroidvania games, even though it was developed concurrently and had no relation to either Metroid or Castlevania. In 2086, the world is decimated and all civilizations fall into ruin due to nuclear Armageddon. In the following millennia, the small pockets of survivors develop into peaceful agriculture nation. The peace is not lasting, however, and evil aliens who emerged from a volcano from a hidden pre-war military base conquer and enslave the surviving populace. You're tall and you're not gonna let it slide, so you alone go against the invaders in this maze platformer. Initially you have nothing but some rocks and your courage, but in time you'll find a pre-war battlesuit and eventually series of add-ons which expand its functionality, like gravity boots, particle negator, pulsar beam and an implosion mine. Rad Warrior is a pretty cool title and very innovative for the time it came out in, so if you're at all into Metroidvania games, this one's not the one to sleep on. I played Speed King a lot back in the day, and I sucked at it, big time. Probably because I was a kid and concept of slowing down ever in a racer seemed like something wrong to me. Something that didn't compute in my little head. Ones and zeros didn't add up, you know. But however you wanna look at it, despite my, at best, mediocrity at it, Speed King is a fun game. It's an arcade racer not unlike Pole Position but centered around motorcycles and not formula cars. The game features 19 opponents and 10 real-life tracks, all of which can be previewed before the race. You can run a test lap before the race if you like to get the feel of a particular track. The bike has 6 manual gears and can reach speeds of 255 miles per hour. Hitting the opponent or going off the road excessively causes you to fall off the bike and restart from a standstill, which sucks. Spellbound is an unofficial sequel to a real title we spoke about in one of the previous year's videos, Finders Keepers. And it's also a flip-screen action-adventure game featuring a magic knight who travels through time to rescue 8 people, his friend wizard Gimbal among them. They all need to be brought back and placed in the correct time and place. This time, however, focus has been placed on adventuring with much less action. Spellbound uses very innovative control system, so-called Windimation, which is built out of menus and submenus with various commands allowing for quite in-depth control and interaction with objects on the screen. And the standard culprits like take object and talk to are here too, making Spellbound feel like a more modern adventure game closer to Maniac Mansion than those early text-based titles. In fact, it feels very modern compared to virtually nearly any other adventure game that released up until then, and was a definite step ahead in the right direction in game design, or a progressive diagonal sidestep. As while it was better playing than text-based parser games, its formula didn't prevail, and icon-based point-and-click interfaces did. If you like adventure games, especially those earlier ones, Spellbound is unique and worth a look. Spin Dizzy is an action puzzle mixture viewed from an isometric perspective, where you're required to navigate series of screens to explore and map out landscapes suspended in 3-dimensional space. And Spin Dizzy is huge, spanning well over 380 full screens. You can switch the viewpoint to all 4 sides to better see the environment on some of those more complex screens. Quite honestly, obsessive switching always made me confused on where I was rather than help me. Your exploration is timed and the game ends either when the whole map is explored or when the time runs out. And that dang timer is unforgiving, I must add. When you discover new areas or collect jewels scattered around the game world, however, that timer extends a little, allowing for longer overall playtime. Spin Dizzy is an odd one, cause on one hand it feels like a relaxing exploration title, and on another it keeps reminding you with a ticking timer that it's not relaxing at all. Split Personalities is an analog puzzle game moved to and enhanced for the digital age, which as we know 80s were. Then we had gaming 90s, with new genres and games dropping left and right, then online 2000s, caused by a boom of omnipresent and affordable fast internet access, and finally the mobile 2010s, with cell phones taking over the world like crazy. Now we're in the AI 2020s, where soon most desk jobs will become obsolete. And since I have one, I hope so, as I honestly hate it with passion. Now obviously I just made it all up, but I'm not that far off, I think. Anyway, Split Personalities is your typical sliding puzzle game with a caveat that instead of 1 empty square to operate the tiles around, you have 4. But if that was all, the game would be way too easy and nothing special. So there's bombs, which have to be moved off the screen, gaps that swallow tiles, and a time limit. If you like logic games and even more so sliding puzzles, this one's definitely for you, even despite only featuring 10 pictures to complete. Don't take it as a reflection on a game's quality, but for me, personally, the best thing about Spy vs Spy 3 Arctic Antics is the fact that it's the last game in the series that I'll ever have to talk about in the C64's gaming history videos. I never liked those, but I understand their appeal. Anyway, my prejudices aside, the third installment places you in the Arctic. And other than that, it's more of the same, so you and a friend, or you and CPU, will compete in getting first to the rocket to escape before the blizzard sets in. As usual, whenever both spies meet, they can fight it out, but most fun comes from various traps and a new temperature mechanic. So if you get caught in opponent's traps often, your body heat will drop, and you can restore it by getting into a heated igloo. Same as previously, you enjoy Spy vs Spy more playing against a friend than CPU, but if there's no one there, I suppose CPU will have to do. It's a good game, same as the earlier ones were, and I dislike it as much as I did the others. StarQuake is another of those games that look as if they were ported straight from ZX Spectrum without any effort. Meaning that the graphics look very similar to the original, as if no one bothered to use any of C64's capabilities. It doesn't mean that the game is bad though, just that the opportunity was wasted. Oh well, such is life. StarQuake is all about you traveling an unstable planet charged with task of preventing it from exploding. This will require you finding and collecting various items and then bringing them back to the planet's core to stabilize it. You can only carry up to 4 at a time, so even if you happen to find all of them straight away, one after another, it will still require a few trips. That however is very unlikely, as the game is composed out of 512 screens arranged in 16 by 32 matrix, so chances of finding all you need straight away are minuscule at best. Given the scope of the game, however, keep in mind that it's easy to get to the point of no return where you're unable to complete the game. Because while you can create artificial pathways that allow you to travel upwards, they only last a moment or so, and most importantly, they're limited in number. At the very game start, the items are randomized and their location in the game is too. So StarQuake actually has a certain degree of replayability. On one hand, Strike Force Cobra is a pretty fun game, on another it's another of those ZX Spectrum ports with limited color palette and very Spectrum-esque graphics. Directly after a game I just roasted for the very same thing, so I'm torn about it. Anyway, a crazy scientist going by the cryptic name of the N.O.M.A.D developed a new kind of nuclear weapon/bomb that has an unprecedented explosive power and could potentially destroy all mankind with a single blast. Creativity behind his name is on another level, so I suppose we should be named the hero, and our quest the mission, and the bomb the bomb. Oh wait, this one's actually really the bomb. Your main task is to get to the 4th level of the scientist's lab and destroy the bomb with at least one of 4 of your team members alive. The lab, however, is heavily defended, so it's going to be anything but easy. At the start of the game you pick 4 out of 8 available characters, all ranging in skills and specializations, and it's them who have to complete your mission. To be able to enter the final chamber with the bomb though, you need a 9-digit code. And you get those digits by freeing scientists along the way, so make sure you free 9 of them before you get to the end of the game. Like I said initially, I have mixed feelings about Strike Force Cobra. I spent countless hours playing it, kicking the doors in, defeating robots, jumping on and off what feels like hundreds of pressure plates, and it was all a blast. On another, I can't help but feel slightly disappointed with the presentation. So make up your own mind about it, cause I surely can't make up mine. Super Cycle is an incredibly simple game, not skill-wise, but because of its design. It's basically a simpler version of Hang On, where you don't actively race against other bikers, but have to reach the finish line before the time runs out. There are other drivers on the road, sure, but they're there only to serve as obstacles for you to slalom around rather than actively challenge it. Your bike has 3 gears and you have to operate them manually, which is not an issue at first, but in later levels where there's not only many bikers around and centrifugal force to struggle against, but there's also potholes, oils and water spills, ice puddles and barriers. Super Cycle becomes a little bit demanding, which I suppose adds to longevity. Pity there's no 2-player mode though. Anyway, what I really like about it though is the sense of speed that you get with the track and everything around it fast and smoothly flowing around you as you push forward. Despite its simplicity, there's a lot of fun to be had in Super Cycle if you like racing games, that is. So if you do, don't sleep on it. Superstar Ping Pong is very similar to Konami's / Imagine's ping pong game on C64, both in terms of graphics and the way it's played. Although it's worth noting that Superstar Ping Pong allows for setting up the table for a horizontal play. While I don't recommend it as it's not as comfortable as playing the game vertically, it's possible and it's there. The game follows 80s table tennis rules, so first player to reach 21 points wins a set, and a game can consist of multiple sets, which can also be set up before playing. Some prefer this game, others Konami's outing. Personally I find them equal and as fun, so wouldn't want to pick a better one, so if you have both, play either. If you have only one of them, you'll not missing much not having access to the other. Tau Ceti is a game of undefined genre, kinda like my height is. In all documents I have it at higher than I really am, when I stand I look shorter, and if asked I swear to be at least 17-18 apples tall. So 8 to 9 times taller than your everyday smurf. Coming back to our game's genre, it's more of a vector first-person shooter than anything else. But there's a lot of those else's in it. In the far future, one of the planets colonized by humans, the titular Tau Ceti to be precise, is decimated by infectious disease and abandoned by the few last colonists that managed to survive the catastrophe. A few years later, a medication is developed and the plan to repopulate the planet is formulated. When the first ship lands on it, contact with it breaks suddenly and it goes silent. There seems to be no way of knowing what happened. It is believed, however, that the automated robotic defenses took over and are treating anything and anyone arriving as a threat, and you're the only one to stop the robotic menace. To do so, however, you must shut down the main reactor of the defense system, and it requires locating and assembling of all parts of the cooling system and then putting it into massively shielded fusion reactor in the capital of the planet, aptly named Centralis. So, you'll be tracking those parts down, shooting many robotic enemies and their installations with your glider, and issuing commands to your onboard computer by hand, typing them in like 20th century peasant. There are 32 cities on the planet altogether, each filled with various installations, so there's a lot of content in Tau Ceti to immerse yourself in. On a side note, all the robots look like flying saucers, so the villains of the game could have easily have been the aliens. And I wonder if that wasn't the initial idea, going by that design only. Terra Cresta is a port from the arcades and it's a vertically scrolling shoot 'em up. Story in Terra Cresta is as good as it is in most other shooters, so not very, and tells a tale of humanity's fight against invading so-called Mendler army. You're behind the steers of winged Galibur fighter craft and have to destroy all enemy forces, same as in most other games in the genre. What's unique about Terra Cresta though is its upgrade system. Unlike in most other shooters where you would just pick up new kinds of weapons, in Terra Cresta all pickups are modules for your craft, so while they upgrade your weaponry, they also expand your ship in size. Having all 4 upgrades installed renders your ship twice in size it originally was, so it's also easier for enemies to hit it. Upgrades work sorta like additional life points, so instead of dying when you're hit, you lose upgrades. Interestingly enough, you may unlock the upgrades from the main body of your ship so that they form a triangle around it and shoot from around you themselves. This way they're invulnerable, but you are not. You can have, and when all upgrades are installed on the ship, transform into a firebird/phoenix-like creature for a short time, and it's indestructible. Terra Cresta, while definitely not the best shooter on C64, is a good one and worth your attention if you're into the genre. Thai boxing is a 1 or 2 players versus fighting game shown in an isometric perspective but played from a side view. I hope that makes sense cause saying it sounds confusing. Same as in international karate, players receive points for successful attacks and they can be high, middle and low. Moves are performed using various joystick combinations with a fire button. There's also dodge and block, and mastering these 2 is a key to success. If one of the fighters is knocked out, the other wins the round. If neither are, points are points are a decisive factor in naming a winner. Thai boxing is not as good of a game as international karate, nor is it as good looking as Bangkok Knights are, but it's definitely a title worth checking out if you like fighting games that are more technical and don't rely solely on flashy special moves and fiery projectiles thrown in every direction. One of the most memorable aspects of the game are the fighters' portraits that also kinda work as health bars. The more often player is hit and damaged, the more the face is bruised and eventually covered in blood. Also, the title screen is one of the most awful looking ones I've seen on C64. But that's not something that should be taken into account when judging the game's quality. If you ever played games like The Clue on Amiga or The Sting, a sequel to The Clue on PC, you know exactly what They Stole a Million on C64 is. In fact, the earlier mentioned two are respectively a remake and a follow-up to the remake. If you haven't played those, let me explain. It's Ocean's 13 except you're not Ocean and there's not 13 of you. But other than that, it's the same. So you're the mastermind behind the breakings and huge heists. For each of your quote-unquote jobs, you need to purchase location plans, information on the targets and hire the best crew there is. Or best you can afford. Each character has their unique specializations and skills ranging from driving to explosives. They'll require an upfront payment and a percentage cut of potential profits. When all that's done, you have to plan the heist itself. It's done in an overhead view of the site. If you've purchased the information on the location beforehand, all the doors and storage locations will be readily visible and you have to move each member of your team on the plans separately, giving them orders and ensuring that the action timings overlap correctly. When it's finally a go time and the raid starts, you're outside issuing orders, keeping an eye for the police, and may recall your team earlier to run off with what's already picked up. You can theoretically enter the site yourself too, to help out obviously, but that leaves you blind to what's going on outside and with no one to warn of police's arrival. The game's interface is entirely window-based and looks very modern for the time, even if the game itself has very sparse graphics and sounds. Presentation, however, is not what makes or breaks the game, and They Stole a Million is an excellent example of an amazing title that doesn't shine in the looks department, but more than makes up for it with fun gameplay loop. Thrust is based on an early arcade title, Gravitar. The first thing you've probably noticed if you somehow managed to not know the game and watch this retrocentric video are the graphics, which are not planar or sprite-based, but entirely vector-driven, which in itself has its ups and downs. High resolution and cleanliness of the presentation is a definite upside, while the lack of color and beautifully animated sprites is what we're missing. Your task in all levels is to find, grab and escape with a ball passing through a top edge of the screen. Sure, there's some kind of a silly story of a struggle between so-called Imperium and the Rebels, not unlike in Star Wars, but much less fleshed out and not good enough to bother ourselves with it here. But if all I said was it, Thrust wouldn't be anything special. So, your ship is subject to gravity and all that it entails, like inertia. So you not only have to direct it to where you want it to go, but also counter both earlier mentioned effects. But wait, that's not all. There's also numerous mounted guns shooting at you and gates that need to be opened to be passable. And all that while balancing in the air. Well, truth be told, there may be no air there, but you know what I mean. Anyway, the game awards you an extra life every 10,000 points and features 6 levels rotated 4 times with different settings variations like reversed gravity and alike. I like Thrust, I'm not very good at it, but I do enjoy it occasionally as a sort of palette cleaner between other games, as it's never not fun. Trailblazer is an arcade ball racing game. You're in control of a constantly rolling ball that races through semi-three-dimensional planes built out of colored tiles. Each color is responsible for enabling a different in-game effect. Brown and orange change nothing, red slows the ball down, green speeds it up, blue launches the ball into a jump, purple blocks the ball, cyan swaps left and right controls, white in arcade game mode warps ahead, black is a hole your ball falls through, and grey is only ever between the levels and the time does not run on them. Pushing your joystick forward speeds the ball, and pulling back slows it down. Fire button is used for jumping, and its length is dependent on the speed you're traveling at. There are a maximum of 9 jumps that you can accumulate, and 7 are given per level. It's worth pointing out that the jump from the blue fields does not use up your jump charges. The game features 20 stages, and every 3 there is a bonus one where you have to jump on fields in a sequence. Trailblazer is a unique game that doesn't appear to be anything special, but ends up being pretty fun when played and not judged by its presentation alone, especially in simultaneous 2-player mode. Uchi Mata is a game that I overlooked back in the day as I couldn't comprehend in my small mind why the opponents didn't fight in this game at all and just held each other awkwardly, hugging as if there was no tomorrow or the end was nigh. Now, clearly I didn't grasp what it was about, so that's why I largely ignored it. Sure, I'm not a fan now either, but at the very least I understand that it's about defensive Olympic sport and henceforth no punches or kicks are allowed. Uchi Mata is very technical in its approach to gameplay. I'd say that it's much more of a simulation than arcade game. You have to position your fighter within a striking distance of an opponent, then get in a fighting stance, which will allow you to input series of directional moves, and these with correct feet placement, shown on the top right of the screen, will allow you to perform various specific throws and offensive grabs, all the while keeping an eye on your stamina bar so that you can build up enough strength to perform those moves. Uchi Mata is definitely not a game for everyone, myself being one of those everyones it's not for, but if you're into sport, chances are you'll love it. Ultima 1 The First Age of Darkness is the first part of the Age of Darkness trilogy of the first few Ultima games and a top-down turn-based RPG. It's a port from Apple II with slightly enhanced graphics and some small changes to character and town names and some puzzles. Before it even released on C64, other games in the series were already available on it. Chronological order of Ultima releases, or lack thereof, is just a nightmare. I mean, it was one back in the day, now we have access to all games regardless of when they dropped. Anyway, the game takes place in a fictional world of Caesarea. It is composed out of 4 continents under the rule of 8 lords, and each lord resides in their own castle, and it's where you can take quests. Other than the castles, there are numerous towns on all continents that allow for purchasing of goods and services. While Ultima 1 may not be as deep or engaging as the latter titles are, it's still an enjoyable and unique experience that sees you saving the princess and going through time and even space to do so. Most of the game is played from top-down perspective, the main map, cities, castles, everything, and only dungeons ever see you exploring them in first-person view. Even though first Ultima is not the most deep and big content-wise out of all games in the series, it's arguably the most important one, as it started the whole series spanning 10 titles, 2 first-person spin-offs, and an MMORPG. It's an odd year when 2 Ultima games come out on the same system, especially when they're so far apart from each other, one being the first game in the series, and second being the fourth, but both are actually first games in their respective trilogies. Anyway, many years after defeating a villain of the previous 3 games, Mundane, the land of Caesarea was transformed, quite literally. Continents rose and sank and new cities were built. The new land was renamed Britannia and is ruled by honourable and peace-loving Lord British. Lord British wants his kingdom to be just and ruled by principles of truth, courage and love, and proclaims that whomever masters the 8 virtues would serve as a spiritual leader and moral compass for all of Britannia. The virtues are honesty, compassion, valor, justice, sacrifice, honor, spirituality, and humility. And you, as Avatar, soon to become staple of the series, take this quest. Unlike any other RPG to date, your goal is not to defeat the villain or become the most powerful, but to reach the highest level in all of the virtues, and then enter the so-called Stygian Abyss to gain access to the Codex of Ultimate Wisdom. Ultima 4 introduced a very deep underlying system that keeps track of all the virtues, meaning everything you do in the game influences their level. Overpaying or cheating a blind man would result positive and negative changes in few of the virtues respectively, same as staying in and fleeing combat would. I mean, staples of the genre like combat with monsters, dungeons, magic shops, puzzles and everything else you'd expect from an RPG is still here. It's just the objective of the game that's entirely different, and not centered around defeating an overwhelming force or a terrible evil villain. Marble Madness originated in the arcades, and it was a very unique and unlike anything else experience controlled with a trackball. It was programmed by no other than Mark Cerny, the man behind current PS4 and PS5 systems. Anyway, the premise behind Marble Madness is quite simple. You have to guide a marble to the finish line through an obstacle course that's filled with both environmental dangers and enemies that will try to destroy your marble whenever they'll get a chance. I've covered Marble Madness on Amiga before, and it was basically arcade perfect port, controls aside. As no joystick, even the best one could compare to the trackball's precision. C64's version is nowhere near the quality. In big part because of the limited capabilities of the system, much lower screen resolution and reduced CPU power that did not translate best to accurate physics simulation, and both caused the game to be at times not as clear and straightforward in where to go next as the bigger versions are. That said, despite its shortcomings, it's a very enjoyable experience if you approach it with the right mindset, and even more so if you have a friend. Then, in simultaneous multiplayer, it's even more fun. Ultimate Wizard is an updated version of 1984's Wizard, and it's an action arcade game with some very simple puzzling. Gameplay-wise, nothing changed, and it's still a single-screen platformer where you'll move around using ladders, staircases and platforms. You'll fight enemies by casting spells. As you know, Ultimate Wizards tend to do that, or you'll do what most of us would have, so try to avoid them. It's still a simple get key to a keyhole formula, making many of the levels technically possible to finish within few seconds. But you also want to score some points, so unless you're speedrunning the game or aiming for some kind of an obscure record, you're more likely to try to spend at least a little longer in each level. Ultimate Wizard consists of 40 levels found in the original and 60 new ones, making for a hefty 100 stages to beat. If you like the first game, this one's a no-brainer. Up Periscope is an attack submarine simulation set during World War II on the Pacific, depicting conflict between US and Japan. Your main goal in any of the 5 included scenarios is to sink Japanese convoys. They can consist of tankers, merchantmen, troop transports and destroyer escorts. The last are always armed with depth charges and surface guns. You're no slouch either and have fore and aft torpedo bays and a surface gun at your disposal. That last is there as a comic relief, I think, as its effectiveness is questionable at best and non-existent at worst, usually being more of an issue of you being on the surface rather than help in any kind of combat scenarios. Since Up Periscope is a submarine simulation, surface is the penultimate of places you'd want to be, the last being directly under a convoy of destroyers dropping depth charges like crazy. Personally, I always preferred silent service, but it may have been because of the familiarity I have towards the series, as Up Periscope is pretty good game too. Uridium is a horizontally two-way scrolling shooter, meaning you get to move both, left and right, as you please, kinda like you do in Defender, but other than that the games are entirely different. Story-wise, 15 huge capital ships invaded our galaxy and they aim to rid of its natural resources. You are sent to stop them. So, you have to defeat each of the huge ships' defenses in form of cannons and numerous fighters that surround them, then land on the ship itself and initiate its self-destruct sequence. So, unlike most shoot-em-ups, you don't have to go through level one way, but circle around the carrier ship fighting with all it sends your way. While the graphics are not groundbreaking, they are very nice and animated super smoothly, so the gameplay is a pleasure to play. I mean, if you're good at the game, cause otherwise it borders on annoying because of how difficult it is. It may not be Souls-like tough, but it's definitely not your everyday shooter. Warplay is really fun when played with a friend, but not the best in single-player mode. It's an action shooter where you play with either a tank, fighter or a bomber against an enemy who's taken control of strategically important island. You have to destroy the enemy bunkers to obtain information about the location of a commander who keeps moving his HQ position. Once you destroy all the bunkers, the commander's location is revealed and you can go and get him. On your way, however, you'll encounter enemy vehicles of same 3 kinds as yours, and will have to dispose of them. While the tanks only move on the ground and shoot at ground level, both planes move in the air and can attack ground and air targets, adjusting their altitude appropriately or by bombing. Somehow Warplay feels a bit blunt when you play it alone, but with a friend it gets much better. Which is odd, as there's no reason for it really, cause you play it one after another and not simultaneously or against each other. But perhaps it's the fact that someone sits there watching, sharing the experience, hints and emotions of the gameplay, rather than having to take it all alone. It's hard to tell. Warhawk is a single-player vertically scrolling shoot-em-up, and it's one of those shooters that have no story, and perhaps it's for the best, cause I've hardly ever saw a shooter that needed one. In Warhawk, you navigate with your spaceship through various asteroid belts, within which there are hidden enemy space bases, and your only real objective in the game is to destroy said installations. Along the way you'll battle many different enemy ships, avoid mines and meteorites, the latter being entirely indestructible. You have a shield, however, and can pick up a power-up, which, while not very impressive as there's only one, can help a lot with completing the game. It temporarily raises your speed and adds auto-fire. It's not groundbreaking, but helps during gameplay, which sadly is not as entertaining as in most other shooters. Warhawk is a game that even during heydays of C64 I only ever played once in a while, as it simply was just not great. Background and enemy graphics are pretty good, having a certain 3D-ish effect to them, which contrasts heavily with your ship sprite, which is entirely 2D and bland looking. Only thing that really stands out in Warhawk is the Rob Hubbard's tune that is too epic for this otherwise mediocre game. World Games is another of Epic's as masters of sports titles, multi-event sports game for up to 8 players. This time, however, the competitions are taking place all around the world, with each discipline being held in another country, and there are 8 of these. Weightlifting in Russia, barrel jumping in Germany, which I must add is quite odd as I've not known Germans to jump over in barrels, cliff diving in Mexico, slalom skiing in France, log rolling in Canada, which is another odd one, but this one I can kinda understand. Beautiful nature-rich country with a lot of woods and lumberjacks, it's vague but I can imagine a connection of sorts. Then there's bull riding in United States, caber toss in Scotland, and finally sumo wrestling in Japan. It's quite an unusual collection of disciplines that should not really fit together, but as per usual, Epics managed to pull it off, and World Games is hella fun against others. And a perfect party game for your C64. And with this episode ending, we've concluded 1986 on C64. It was a very interesting year, a lot of amazing titles released, but despite 16-bit wave of systems quickly gaining momentum, it was hardly over for world's most popular 8-bit micro. But we'll tackle beginning of 1987 in the next video, so make sure to come back to watch it. And you know, it may very well drop tomorrow or in 7-8 days. My schedule is a hot mess and I mix and match the releases as I see fit. But if you subscribe, and 70% of you sadly are not, then you'll always get new upload in your subs box when it drops. Even better, if you click the bell, YouTube will send you a notification when the next one's out. So think about it. If you feel generous and would like to support my channel, I'd appreciate Patreon and YouTube memberships. They really help a lot and will go towards replacing my aging editing rig. You will also always get access to new videos a day early. But if you can't or don't want to do that, like and subscribes are great too. Most of all, however, I would like to take a second here and thank all the YouTube Let's Play and playthrough creators, from whose videos short bits were taken for this one as a video background to my commentary. They're amazing, and thanks to their efforts, retro community can prevail for years longer and in better form than it could have otherwise. So thank you. For me though, this is all, so have a good one and I'll see you next time. Peace.